anywhere, but the first thing I do need to touch on is the fact that the meeting will be recorded. There's quite a lot of colleagues around the world that are wanting to look at the recording, a lot of requests. So if you're uncomfortable with that, then I've got no problem if you want to leave the meeting or you want to withdraw. If you don't want to take part in the conversation, that's absolutely fine too. Just do what you feel is that you're comfortable with. But we thought it was important to try and record the meeting for the benefit of other colleagues, people in different time zones and stuff. The other thing is, if it does go down, and there is a chance it does go down, we've got plans A, B, C, and D all the way up to F as backup. Leslie Ann might even talk about some of those kind of ideas as well. I'll try and post a message on my Twitter stream, and we'll also post it. The other thing, that's interesting. So I can't do that in Zoom at the same time. That's a shame. Okay, so I can't write in the text box and present at the same time. Sorry, I had a whole bunch of sort of text messages, so you can pick up links as well. I'll post a link, as I say, on my Twitter stream if it kind of goes down. The hashtag for this is Distance Design Ed. Again, feel free to post questions using that tag. We'll also pick up tags on Facebook and a few other places. Tags can be quite useful ways of bringing stuff together from different spaces. Lots of different social media resources actually use tagging or some other kind of indexing, and it allows you to do more advanced things later on. The other thing is, I don't know if, I'm hoping that you did get a copy of the link to this presentation, or you may have seen it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly stop sharing, and I'm just going to post the link into the chat. Oh, that's brilliant, Nicole. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for that. So that link is to this presentation document. As I say, it's not even really, to be quite honest, a presentation document. As I say, it's just something that hopefully we can use to structure the conversation. So, with that in mind, the other thing we need to say. Sorry. As I say, I've got far too many things open. The other thing, just to help run the conversation on Zoom, because there's quite a few of us in here. Again, I'm just going to stop sharing just for a second. My apologies. I forgot to go through this stuff as well. As I say, we're hoping that this is going to be more of a discussion. So I'm going to stop talking after a while. Honestly, promise. I won't keep going like this. The other thing I'm very conscious of is the fact that I'm Scottish. So again, if you struggle to understand what I'm saying, if I'm not speaking loud enough, if I'm talking too fast, then please feel free to stick in the text box. Let me know that, okay? So if it's something urgent in the text box, feel free to stick a couple of exclamation marks right at the start. And similarly, if anybody has any questions as we go through, then please feel free to put them in the chat box as well. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat box. I'm also joined by a couple of other colleagues here as well, who'll be looking at the chat box also. Sticking a couple of question marks, it just flags it. It just helps us see where the questions actually are, okay? So feel free to stick any questions in there. Or use the hashtag, stick a question on Twitter. We'll try to keep an eye on all of these different places. As you can already kind of guess, trying to keep an eye on what's happening on video, in the text box, on Twitter, on different social media spaces can be quite difficult. So I am massively lucky to be joined by some fantastic colleagues today. So from the Open University, and feel free to unmute and say hello. I've got Nicole, and Emma's joined us as well, and Georgie.
Hi.
And from all the way, kind of all the way from Holland to the UK, we've got Peter Lloyd from TU Delft and Leslie Ann from Tulane in Mississippi. Mississippi? Oh, no, sorry, have I got it wrong? Sorry, Leslie Ann.
In New Orleans.
Of course. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so feel free to keep an eye out, folks, on any questions. Feel free to interrupt me as well. I've got no idea how this session is going to kind of go. We'd rather keep it quite informal. We'd rather keep it quite informal and more of a kind of discussion. But over the last few days, there has been a few sort of themes that have emerged. And I thought it was useful to try to bring some of those together. So I'm just going to share my screen again and put those themes up here. So the idea I've got, and it's not necessarily the right idea, I'm more than happy to sort of flex on this. The idea that I had was, oh, by the way, can I just check? Can everybody see that okay? Cool. And feel free, you can either look at it using Zoom, or you can actually go into the Google Doc and be inside the Google Doc at the same time. It just depends on how, meta you want to go with this. Don't get confused between the two, by the way. It can get really, anyway, doesn't matter. Have you seen Inception by any chance? Okay, so there's 6 kind of big themes that have kind of come up. And if we've got no sort of idea of what it is that we want to do in terms of discussion, then I'm more than happy to kind of run through these themes. I'm also happy if people wanted to vote on these themes, if there was anything that people really wanted to touch on. But for each of these, I've kind of prepared a bit of a slide that tries to give some of the material that we've tried to collect on the blog, and then hopes to maybe initiate a bit more of a discussion round about it thereafter. We have got some really, really good thinkers in the room today as well. So I'm also quite happy that we don't, that this isn't us answering questions on this stuff, that this isn't us being points of authority, that we could take work away, that we could work on stuff. We might have follow-up conversations and discussions. So I don't know, does anybody want to respond to that or suggest any other ideas?
I think the themes I most encountered were all around assessment, other things too, but assessment is really quite a tricky thing because it's so formalized maybe, but yeah, just the recent ones.
So let's go for an upvote on assessment. Unfortunately, that's one of the ones that we've got posts in progress on that one, Nick. But no, that could be quite a good discussion. Cool.
I would put out active-based learning. We do a lot of project-based learning with hardware, and so that's a real dilemma at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
On that, like
here, Sharon.
And prototyping and experimenting with participants, testing, those kind of things. Yeah.
Cool. That's the other one that we haven't got much on yet. Well, we've got a bit. Yep. Cool.
We seem to be the same: prototyping, model making, anything practical is causing issues. And we're looking for alternatives, but they always seem a bit more dumbed down.
Right. Okay. Okay.
It may be in one of these areas. I'm worried also about how to create a sense of community with students, and so they're not isolated.
Yeah.
And might be in the communications, I don't know.
Yeah, and group work too, how to facilitate students to collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
I have,
sure. Or maybe stick that or.
I also was wondering about site visits. I had a number of site visits lined up in April, basically, to different areas.
We did have a quick idea this morning. We had a coffee meeting this morning that now might actually be a really good time to break curfew, take your video camera out and go into the middle of Rome or London or some of a really bad thing to do. Oh shit, we're recording, aren't we? But there might be some other opportunities that present themselves because of the different spatial qualities of some of our environments just now. But anyway, that's an aside. Okay, cool. Okay, well, what we'll maybe do then, we've already got some material on the blog round about communicating. I think the only thing I'd maybe just quickly want to do then, maybe Leslie Ann, if I could pull you in on this one, it's maybe just a couple of quick tips and then we'll move on from communicating rather than linger on it. We'll move on to the other ones that we've got as priorities. Again, just some top tips from people who have done this sort of thing for a long time. So Leslie Ann, I noticed from your blog post, the 7 ways to move your design-based class, there was a bit of chat round about sort of backup and plan Bs and stuff.
Thanks, Derek. So that blog post actually started with an email that I sent to some colleagues when we realized that we were going to be shutting down. At Tulane, we have something called a faculty learning community. So I had sent out a challenge to people from anywhere in Tulane to see how they could use design methods in their classes. So there were a lot of people who were using design in their classes for the first time. And then we got this thing telling us we were going offline. And so I was trying to see how to encourage people to feel that their classes could still happen online, even though we were going to be not going to be able to meet face to face. So a couple of things that I had in that blog post and that email to my colleagues is the first one actually is about community. It's not listed as that in the blog post, but when I did a class online last year between Stanford and students in Trinidad and Tobago, the first thing we did was to create some small WhatsApp groups for the students in the two different locations. And then we gave them a series of little community building activities. So as I move online, I'm thinking very consciously of how can I be creating these small groups so that students can continue to have conversations. Like I haven't quite designed my new curriculum yet, but I'm thinking about that, having them do things like, share a photograph from home so that they could talk about it, share work together so that they could talk, consciously trying to create a lot of activities where they can talk. Zoom has small groups, breakout rooms that we can use. So I'm going to try to use that in my classes. And I had another community thing. Well, Google Docs and things like that, that's important. Communication-wise, it's really important to have a backup plan because, so in New Orleans, we're always trying to be prepared for disasters. So actually, a few weeks ago, by coincidence, we were encouraged to do an online class in preparation for hurricane season. And in the middle of my class, my internet at home went down. And I was the host of the class, so I was in a panic. But at least because I had already created these WhatsApp groups with the students, I was able to communicate with them via WhatsApp and create a plan B pretty easily. But that's just something for you to keep in mind, that people's internet speeds are going to be crazy. People's internet access will be a little bit compromised at this time. Absolutely. So I'm trying to create a lot of discussion, whole group discussion as well as small group discussion. And then I'm also trying to create space for reflection all along the process so that, as students have the activity, they also have a space for individual reflection on the activity, the success of the activity. When the internet went down in the other class, we had to reflect on that. How does this affect our work in the future? So individual reflection, small group reflection, and then whole group reflection. The only other thing, so not related to communication, just one last thing, and then I'll pass it back. It's important for us to remember that maybe we have to create our work in much smaller chunks. So like, whereas, a colleague told me, well, she's going to do like 45 minutes, a 45-minute presentation and then like 10-minute Q&A. And I listened and I thought, oh my God, no. It might work, but I think that, we just have to remember things like that people have lots of stuff going on. Their attention spans are going to be pretty short. So a long lecture may not work. I'm trying to design my class in a different way so that it's short chunks of activities, lots of discussion. No,
that really rings a bell with the distance method that we've ended up at the Open University after quite a number of decades of learning. I don't know, does Nick or even Peter or someone want to pick up on that? It sounds pretty familiar. Nicole? or don't. I don't mind having a chat.
Yeah. Sorry, no, I've just been typing away. The community stuff definitely. Yeah, that definitely sounds about. I think for larger scale, Georgie's written down a kind of a blog post around just having a general kind of a group site, social media, kind of like what's up, but maybe for the larger, kind of just general little posts and things of general interest to add on that, just for community creation. But for chunking, so coming back to chat, I think that's the main kind of method we use to chunk learning materials into digestible units, where you vary the mode of delivery as well. So you serve for different kinds of people, but also for different kinds of content, and to kind of address the same thing in different ways, so that there's a bit of redundancy in that as well. So, but chunking is quite important there. I think some insights on how you do you write for online media as well. Can't remember all of it, but it has about, topic sentence at the beginning, shorter sentences, definitely shorter paragraphs, the words you use. There are quite a few resources online, I think.
So Sherry's asking, how big is a chunk? Which is quite a nice question.
One scroll?
That's a good one, Nicole. I'm trying to think of chunks of 10 to 15 minutes, actually. I'm trying to keep it really short. I don't know if I will do it, but that's what I've been thinking of.
So if I can chime in here real quick, I think I read somewhere that when they decided on the length of TED Talks and they came up with 17 or 18 minutes, I think there was some neuroscience basis to that. So I think keeping this rule of thumb, like 17 to 18 minutes is the max attention span of a regular adult human that you can count on. So if you have a 40-minute lecture, just break it up with a 5-minute discussion in between two halves or something.
So certainly at the OU, some of the chunking that we would do can also depend on the study stage as well. I think I hear what you're saying about the attention span thing of the TED Talk, and that's really important, particularly at the start. Leslie Ann, when she talked about how she was creating community, all the research that we've done on how community forms in our virtual studios is exactly that. Really, really small activities that are really simple and quick to communicate, really simple to contribute to, but actually have quite a divergent output. And that divergent output engages people in seeing what other people have done, and that builds up community. But then we can build on those smaller activities, make them larger, and we should expect that as well, because as a designer, you're going to put little activities together to bigger processes. Then, this is almost the science behind design methods, to be honest with you. And you build them up, and you start to build up your own larder or repository or toolbox. Generally speaking, is there a consensus that it might be useful to try to pull things together round about sort of activity-based learning, or does anybody else want to? Sorry, Peter, are you?
Yeah, just got one thing to say. Oh, hello.
Go for it.
Okay, so in our experience, so we are mostly on campus in class education, and when we do move students online and we move them fast, it's quite a transition for them. And one of the things they will feel uncomfortable about is going from sitting in lectures for 2 hours to doing lots of small chunks, and they'll feel like they're not really doing proper work. So you need to prepare them and say, it's okay when you're working online at a distance to be just doing shorter bits of activity. Otherwise, they're going to feel like they're just not doing it right. So you've got to help the students prepare for this transition. It's really important.
Okay, cool. Peter, did I see you wanting to?
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with what's said. I think you have to kind of think out your learning journey a bit more once you go offline, in terms of how you link the chunks together, if you like, and so you think about the kind of learning objectives for each bit of material. And obviously the more advanced students will be able to kind of focus for a bit longer, maybe, or it depends on the kind of level of material that you're trying to put across, or the kind of like what you're trying to teach. But I think it's important to kind of plan out the learning in perhaps ways that when you're giving a lecture, you can kind of make it up as you go along sometimes. online, if you kind of, it's very easy to lose people, I think. And keeping people focused, reinforcing what you're trying to kind of learn, linking the learning together so that, and making it kind of flexible too, so you can come in and go out.
Okay. Is it useful? Hello?
Yep, go for it.
Is it useful to think about chunks, not in terms of length or time, but in terms of the concepts you're communicating?
Yeah, definitely.
I would have to engage with.
Yes.
So is it one concept per chunk for a beginning student, perhaps two concepts as they become more experienced?
Mm-hmm.
How big are those concepts?
There can also be different reasons for the chunking as well. So, for example, I think you both made very good points there as well, the previous speakers, in terms of inducting students into this way of working. And a chunk is not necessarily what you're teaching in terms of design content. It can be how to work online. So I think preparing for that stuff is actually really important. And yes, I know that your background is in mathematics, and we've had this conversation many times before. You don't teach partial differential equations by just doing it once. You can repeat chunks and you can iterate and develop as you do it again. Oh, so one question that's just come up. Now, this is a tricky one. So it's Heather is asking about sort of using WhatsApp. This is a tricky one. I'm very conscious of the fact, Heather, I've been throwing on a lot of resources, a lot of stuff online saying you can do this, you can do that. Isn't it great? Yeah, technology. And there's a massive, massive ethical, political and economic dilemma to a lot of this stuff, even the fact that we're using Zoom. I don't know that we're going to be able to answer this question right now, and we can maybe talk about different institutional policies just now. I know certainly at the Open University, what we try to do is we try to find the most universal and open software that we possibly can, because we will not require that students have a Google account, or, okay, that's not quite true, that's another story. It's difficult to compel students to have certain types of account when you know that there are ethical difficulties with some of the agreements that some students have to sign up to. I'm not too sure what WhatsApp's like. I don't know whether Tulane, Leslie Ann, whether there's issues there or.
So WhatsApp isn't, I guess, expressly prohibited, but we had this conversation, like the information in the blog post, I couldn't send it out from Tulane Communication because I refer to WhatsApp and Facebook. And these are not tools. Tulane sanctions Canvas and Zoom. But like from my personal experience, I know that you need this plan B. You need a communication platform that even if data goes down, you'll be able to use it. Not internet, even if your Wi-Fi goes down, you'll be able to use it. And you have to be using tools that people have access to. So I was using Facebook groups a really long time ago. I don't use them today, but Facebook groups for me made sense because everybody was on Facebook, and then it was just easy to do that kind of communication. So I just think about where can we all communicate easily, and yes, I know that institutions will put a kind of a limit on certain things, but I recognize that I need the backup.
Yep. Okay. You probably actually saw me doing that because I think I've got my whole desktop shared. I was bringing up the social media profile of an academic here in the UK. I think she's in Ireland, actually. Catherine Cronin. And that's her work, is on the ethics and the responsibility of these kind of intersections of different social media space. And her position, that she teaches in primary education, and whether or not you should include social media in primary education. She's quite firmly and quite strongly of the opinion that you should, because otherwise, where is the social guidance to develop people in social media taking place? Now, that's a slightly different discussion to who owns the social media spaces. But she's definitely a good thinker on this matter. I think maybe we'll take that one online and maybe pause it for just now, because there are a lot of other issues that hang on. Sorry, listen, yeah, crack on.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Eugene's question about, not requiring synchronous work.
So to give credit where it's due, I think Sherry raised the question initially, and I'm just yes,
I
would love to talk about this.
Yeah, so I let me scroll back up. So like we are required to teach where possible in the same time block. And we are kind of asking everyone to show up synchronously. But I'm also in the group in the place where I would prefer people to be able to do this asynchronously, just because I recognize and respect the craziness of people's lives. So like I'm creating activities where people can do things asynchronously. And I will probably not require attendance for the synchronous activities. But the reason that we've been asked to do the synchronous work is to allow people to be able to attend all the different classes that they would normally have to attend. And it's just too crazy it's just difficult to coordinate everybody's time. But I think that asynchronous work is more equitable.
Mm-hmm. I think I agree with that asynchronous work is more equitable. On the other side of the teeter-totter, I'm faced with struggling with this. Like, how do you create community and a feeling that we're all in it together, collaborating in real time together? Like, how do you have a brainstorm session if it's all this asynchronous? How do you balance those two?
There was a brief Twitter conversation that I had with somebody on this one, Eugene. I actually started a blog post on this, and I think it'd be good to finish it, and maybe on the back of what we talk about just now. We need to stop thinking of synchronicity and asynchronicity as if they're like two things that are here and there. There's a whole series of working together that works, and this happens in professional context as well as educational context. It's not the case that everybody is there at exactly the right time all of the time. It's almost not the normal, if you like, in a professional context. So even things like, I don't know, semi-synchronous or semi-asynchronous, we need to think about the scales. So for example, at the Open University, we are the opposite of what Leslie Ann's just describing in some ways. Asynchronous is the unique thing. That's the special thing. But we also have, it goes back to the chunking, we also expect students to complete chunks within periods of time or zones of time. So they are at least working relatively synchronously or partially synchronously. We need better words than it just being an either or. I think there's lots of ways you can bring people on and say, look, we're looking for a hand in at the end of this week, or this is the back end deadline, this is the backstop, or this is the zone of hand in, or whatever it is. And you can still reasonably maintain people coming with you. Our personal finding is, particularly when you've got a large group of students, that synchronicity, even though it's not purely synchronous, is really important. Because even if students see, not at the exact moment they're doing it, but roughly round about the same time as they're doing a sketch on Y or whatever it is, or a study on X, if they're seeing what other students are doing in a digital space or an online space, that massively informs what they're doing and makes them feel as if there is a synchronicity. It's the difference between being synchronous and maybe present as well, which is quite another concept that we'll touch on. Anybody else on? Does that make sense, by the way, or is that too far away?
I think it makes sense. I think I'm still stuck on how do you capture that magical moment that happens when students are collaborating together and somebody said something and that sparked an idea in somebody else in real time right there in conversation. And if we take moments like that out of the curriculum, how much are we depriving students of the kind of these wonderful kind of collaborative opportunities that can only happen in real time?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I would challenge you on whether it can happen only in real time. I do believe that they can happen in other spaces. It's harder to see them happening, and I've actually seen that. Doing distance tuition, I've actually witnessed a totally sort of penny drop moment where somebody suddenly realised the solution to a design problem they were working on. They went on to actually do really quite well with that design idea. Again, it was rarer than you would in a face-to-face.
Derek, can I just say, I think it's about finding a balance, because which is what we have to do at the OU. I mean, most of you guys online are in a kind of a better place than we are when we start the year with students who are remote and who have never ever met one another, you're in a great situation where your students have met one another because they've been working together during the year. Find themselves in this strange situation. Situation we manage with a combination of asynchronous and synchronous touch points to develop a sense of community amongst our learners. And I think there are times when, for that brainstorm, as you said, it can be helpful for that to be happening in a synchronous environment where you're hopefully recording so that anyone who can't be there can catch up. It's not the same, but at least it gives them a sense of what's happened. But then you have asynchronous spaces as well, in which a lot of the other glue can happen. And I think you'll find that some students will develop their own asynchronous spaces in which they're going to communicate. That some of it is about what we provide for them, but it's also about enabling and giving permissions for them to perhaps extend what might at the moment be a social connections into learning connections. Yeah, that's all I want.
Yeah, okay. I know that doesn't maybe go into the specifics that you might need to actually say, well, that's great, but how do I actually go about this? But maybe that's something we can work on sort of offline as well. I'm very conscious of the fact that there's lots of different scales that we can talk about this kind of stuff. And I'm very conscious of the fact as well that what a lot of people are needing right now are just how-to guides or something that says, I don't want to know about that, so what do I do about X or whatever it is? So again, if it's more helpful for us to get down to those sorts of things, then brilliant. My practical tip for this would be to set out a weekly plan. Think in terms of chunks of weeks, perhaps, and then just try to work out yourself, what can I do synchronously? What can I do? There was a lovely thing from Steve Wrigley, who was he's a graphic designer at the Glasgow School of Art, and basically their studio practice, basically it's chunked. It's chunked by week. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the studio at the start of the week. They go in, everybody sits around about the blackboard, and they write on the blackboard what it is that they're going to do for that week. Now, they might be working on longer projects, so they might be at different stages. But again, maybe thinking in that sort of scale, maybe a weekly sort of bigger chunk, and then working out when it is you can have asynchronous points and when you can have like points where you can trust students to do stuff. And there is that issue of trust as well, by the way, that you have to trust that, maybe learning can take place without you being there. And that could be a difficult thing to do as a teacher. When you're going to have the different types, if you like, of contact point with your students, might actually be quite useful there. I don't know, does anybody else have any other tips in terms of how you plan synchronicity, say, across a week? Cool, excellent. That's great. Right, okay. I think what we'll do is, there's definitely a post there around about that kind of, and it is a difficult issue. I mean, at some point, we're going to hit the hard limit of how do you actually engage in proper tacit learning, which at the end of the day is what a lot of design praxis and practice is actually about. And, there may be hard limits to what we can actually do in some of these spaces, and maybe this is one of them. Okay, right. Have I missed any really interesting and good questions? I'm very conscious of the fact as well, we're already at 4:30. I'm okay till about 6 o'clock. I don't mind going on. I know that other people will have to go. That's absolutely fine too. I'm conscious of the fact that we won't also pick up all of the questions. I'll scrape the text and make sure that we do at some point pick up all of the questions somehow. So are there any important questions that I've missed that would be quite good to cover just now? No, nobody?
I think Mark raised a good question, I think, about physicality and materiality. Like, what do we do when students need to build with specific physical materials, and how do we handle that?
Mm-hmm. I was going to say...
Hi, Eugene. This is Mark. The only solution I have right now, because we're under shelter-in-place order in the Bay Area of California, is to start investigating some online services so that at least
like Shapeways, that kind of thing.
We can use those to get some 3D printed and laser cut components.
Okay, Peter, did you want to?
I was only going to say maybe there's a question about how you replace studio activity, how you kind of recreate what happens in the studio online, and you have kind of experience with working in online studios. How I think there's a few questions around like the practical issues of making.
Yep.
Can I add a few things? We have just gone to home working today. This is our first day of all staff being home working. Strathclyde University in Glasgow, that's where we're from. And I'm amazed at how our students have got together. Literally, our 4th and 5th year have set up a 3D printing sort of business. They've found out who's got 3D printing. They have got online payment. They've got queued up students waiting in line for parts to be made. And we've got a whole range of things that are being organised. We've advised, and students have come up with ideas like doing mock-up models, so cardboard models of what they want to do, and then look at various parts as 3D model parts or sketching. And we've told them just to focus on the final solution as opposed to you have to build a model, prove it works, get feedback from users, but they're doing it all online, and they have actually jumped into this and are coming up with quite a few good ideas. We do run a class called Global Design, and a lot of universities now do that, where you're working with partners virtually. So all of the principles that they know about that apply now to everything else, which is a positive. Yep.
That's brilliant, Hilary. Can we get a quick recipe on that, do you think, if I give you a shout offline?
Yes, absolutely. I can just put together some points. I am not sure. I think perhaps Ross Briscoe is on the group as well, if Ross wanted to say anything. Ross, yes, I see him there.
Oh, I'm still here, but I seem to be in space for some reason.
Right.
I'll need to figure that out before I do my lecture on Friday.
Right. Ross is streets ahead of me in terms of anything I'm doing, but Ross also works with me, and we're part of the Design Society. That's the reason we were kind of invited in. And Ross and I will put together something about good tips for working online, particularly for design.
That would be brilliant, Hilly. Really appreciate it. So I think I sent you an email earlier in the week about this. You undoubtedly had other things on your mind, though.
I did.
Well, that'd be great. Any of these things that we can share, and this goes out to absolutely everybody listening today. One of the things that we have found useful, it's one of the things we're trying to develop on the blog. Again, it doesn't have to be in the blog. I'm more than happy that it goes somewhere else. This isn't about egos or like controlling the information. It's about sharing the information.
Absolutely.
One of the things that we have found useful is the recipe format as a kind of really quick way of saying, here's a thing I did. This was where it was useful. This was the circumstances under which it was useful. You can do it. It's almost kind of like a way of sharing practice, a short and quick way of doing it. It can be as academic or as practical as you want it to be. Different people and different voices can contribute them as well. The more we can share, and it's particularly these little examples like that, Hilary, they really can help colleagues out. They really can. So that's brilliant. The materiality one it's a tricky one for us to answer, I think, at the OU, because we start from the premise that we're almost, I'm not going to say non-material, we try to invoke as much material as we possibly can. One of the things we do is we send out, for example, a welcome box that's got stuff in it. I don't know what the regulations are on posting physical things out to people are anymore, but don't rule out the kind of old-fashioned sort of way of doing things. There's certain things that you can do in a really lo-fi way. That was our plan F, by the way, the backup for today. We would just use postcards and post them to each other. But yeah, if we can share those kind of ideas, the physical ideas. Does anybody else want to add anything on the materiality stuff? Sorry, Peter, yeah.
I was thinking, just to pick up on that idea of sending people things. I mean, the probe method is a way of finding out about other people, and that, I think that's a useful thing, that you can explore the postal system and explore what's happened with the postal
lovely.
system somehow.
Need a recipe.
Yeah.
So here's your brief. Your brief is a flat pack. It has to be whatever size it is for first class mailing in whatever country. Yeah, that could be quite nice.
Until the post goes down, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yes. Yep. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm just having a look at the questions. In fact, I'll stop looking at the questions because I don't want to sit here.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, I teach. I started teaching this semester architecture for first year undergraduates, studio teaching. And I wonder how to encourage them, or which platforms can be used to encourage them to do peer participation or peer assessments during, or let me say, between classes, since they meet with us as teachers twice a week. But as first year students, they are really used to work in the studio, in the physical studio, and talk between themselves. And now this does not exist anymore, at least for a few months. So I pose this question to you, since I think this skill is really important at the beginning of the design education.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I know certainly we have a couple of posts on the blog, and there's one in preparation round about tuition and studio that kind of picks up on this, and also picks up on previous queries about how you develop community through this kind of sort of activity. We've also got a growing list of virtual design studio, sort of like bits of software. We're actually also running a couple of sort of studios as well. So we've got a Padlet and a Trello board and a few others. Again, I don't want to make that. I've started off already talking about the technology before you talk about how you're actually going to do the thing. A few people online have also been talking about the fact that studio is much more about the kind of social praxis, far less about maybe the just the tangible physical space itself. It's so much more than that. So I think my take on it would be that you need to think about what it is that you're trying to achieve with that community, and then add tools to develop that as you go. I mean, I think Hillary's example there of students actually self-organising is a very, very good one. You could put a lot of effort, and again, at the Open University, we've spent decades putting a lot of effort into creating virtual design studios. You don't have the luxury of all of that effort. You go to a lot of trouble to try and create a virtual design studio for 20 students, and it might not work. Something that's far simpler and a lot more emergent or a lot more agile is probably far more used to you. So again, it goes maybe back to my big tip would be to go back to the chunking idea. Helping students learn how they can actually work together online is your first step. And we're really bad in the UK. I don't know what it's like in other countries. We're really bad at teaching collaborative and group working. So again, what we try to do at the Open University is not teach it. We try to just let it happen and let it emerge. So again, we try to do that through studio activity, through sharing stuff that students do, and then students commenting on that, and then building that commenting up onto critique, and just layering and then layering and layering on top of these little chunks until you actually see these communities sustain themselves or develop themselves. I don't know, does anybody else have a better recipe or model? Or anything to add to what I just said there, Nick? I've missed out loads of stuff in that. I know I've shortcut.
Well, that's the problem. It's really hard to. Maybe we can, recommend some papers or so. You've got quite a collection of not just studies but actual papers that look at the mechanisms behind it. I think for me, the chunking one goes really well hand in hand in encouraging actual conversations around things and reflection. We had these words before. I mean, these are quite key. And you're right. They need to emerge, naturally. However, you do need to give some guidance, because in the studio you oversee and overhear a lot, which is so difficult to recreate online. And if you have first years, as you say, they don't know yet. How do you do that? So, of course, giving some examples and have these small tasks, easy tasks everyone can relate to. And then you can slowly build up, showing by example how you might have a post that's not just, oh, that's great, but something much more of a constructive feedback. I think these things are all the little things that are really quite important to kind of make it valuable. I think oftentimes, like in social media, it's just you have a look at it, it's funny, whatever, you move on. But that's not what the studio is like. It's much more, you want to get something deeper out of it. And there needs to be a certain purpose to it. So if you do a task too meaningless, that's not. So there needs to be a good balance of how you make this engagement happen in the chunks. So, the concepts and the things. So starting up with something students can relate to and then slowly building up towards things that are shared, where it's much more relevant to maybe a design task they have to do. Yeah.
Yep. I'm also just picking up on some of the questions in there because it does kind of overlap with the notion of synchronous whiteboard tuition. So I think that was it Alison that was asking about whiteboards. Again, we've got another post on whiteboards. I'll just stick the link in there. Okay, no, I won't then. Technology. Give me 15 minutes.
So I can just add something to what Nicholas is saying. I did an activity. I mean, it's still kind of clunky, but I asked students to design a critique format. And then when we did our online activity, they had to use the critique models that they themselves had designed to give people feedback on work that they had done. So that we moved away from just saying, oh, this is great. So maybe something like that could be helpful as well in getting people to participate a little more in these online activities, or just adds another layer if they can create the critique format and that format exists so that people know how to give some deeper feedback on the activities that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely. So that second link that I've just posted in the chat, that's the link to the whiteboard article. We'd be really keen to collect some more examples of whiteboard. I personally think that whiteboard's one of the nicest ways, if you're doing any kind of asynchronous stuff, just running a quick chat, using a whiteboard service, just keeping it simple as possible, particularly one where you can quickly throw an image in, scribble over the top of it, and you can actually engage in discussion. And the more that you can, as a tutor, disengage from that discussion, allow the peer-to-peer critique, as Leslie Ann's saying, you're acting as almost an exemplar of how to do that and then handing it over. You do see that students then pick up that practice themselves and they'll see the value of it. Again, if you can answer the simple question of what's in it for me, what do I get back from this as a student, and you answer that with a positive, then students will use that. So I think synchronous whiteboarding, and I've used Prezi and a few of the other example bits of software that people are using there before. I think it's a really, really strong and powerful tool to keep connected in that kind of space. Okay. Right. I think, is there any other questions I'm missing or anything else that anybody wanted to add to what we've just been talking about? Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to pick up on what Leslie said, I think, this is an opportunity to maybe think about what we're actually teaching, and, to draw on the media. So to get designers to be a bit more critically reflective, there's obviously more time to think. There's obviously more time to kind of search around for content that's interesting, to engage with that content. So it's maybe moving away from just trying to recreate what we do in the physical space, and actually think what this kind of virtual space opens up in terms of what new things we can teach and what kind of new kind of design capabilities we can develop. Perhaps, being more critical, being more, reflective, thoughtful, articulate in terms of writing, those kinds of things. Then maybe they're the kinds of things that we can begin to develop in this kind of new world that we find ourselves in.
No, absolutely, I completely concur. And just you and I have cough written about before. Usually, if you try to replicate the studio in a virtual space, you'll fail, because what you think the studio is tends to be behavioural, it tends to be superficial. You forget about all the other cultural and the other stuff that goes with the studio. It's almost like trying to replicate what you're already doing is probably going to fail in a number of different ways. So trying different things is definitely, and also bringing your students along with that trying. There's no harm whatsoever. I know a lot of commentators have said this, but it's worth reinforcing. Bring your students along with you on this. You're not going to get this right necessarily, and it's absolutely okay to say, look, I'm going to take my own lessons here. I'm going to prototype and iterate, and even show them the back end of that thinking. I had actually thought of trying to record all the preparation that went into even just this meeting and creating the blog and a whole bunch of other stuff. Unfortunately, the tech let me down, but that's another. Making that stuff visible. Again, it's, as designers, you turn up to the client with your fancy image, one image, and it totally ignores all of the effort that you don't show. It totally ignores all the stuff that goes into it. So why not take your students along? And again, that's why I like that. I love that example from Hilary there of the self-organisation. But yeah, sorry, Leslie, did you? Oh, sorry, right, okay, my apologies. Right, I'm conscious of the fact that we are coming up to an hour. We're kind of still on, technically we're still on the first topic, but we've touched on a lot of other stuff. Is everybody okay to continue? Okay, cool. What I'm going to suggest we do is that we have a quick break. It is okay to have a break in an online session. Feel free to, particularly if you've been drinking water all day. So I'm going to suggest we take a couple of minutes break. Feel free to put your camera off if you want to. Grab a cup of tea, cup of coffee, or whatever it is. Sorry, that sounded really British, didn't it? I'm so sorry. Grab a beer if you want it, or whatever, libation, victuals, viands, whatever. And we'll be back here in exactly 2 minutes and 33 seconds. Speak to you soon.
So we're back.
Were you timing it, Leslie?
No. Just enough time really to get up and walk and then come back.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. Usually I do actually, if I say something stupid like it's going to be 2 minutes 33, I do actually always time it to make.
Oh, that's funny. That's nice.
You have to. If you don't do what you're going to say, it's not fair.
Yeah. So how long are your classes at Open?
We don't have classes as such. One of the things I was going to prepare for today was actually a kind of how-to guide, almost like how we do it at the OU. I'll maybe still do that and maybe stick it online somewhere, because it's totally different. It's completely different. It's, it can't be the same.
Okay.
So basically all our material is written well in advance. We'll take 2 to 3 years. It can cost upwards of, £700,000 to create a course at the Open University. It's a massive thing, a huge, huge undertaking. That's how seriously we take this stuff. So, we're looking at colleagues like yourselves who are being told to go online and do it in distance tomorrow and thinking, sick, man, that is just totally sick. Because without the support, without everything that goes to make it, the thing that it works in, it's so difficult. But anyway, again, the other critical difference is, and we've touched on it quite a lot, I think, in the conversation already, is that the way that we write the material is intended for you not to be there. So you don't have that proximate or asynchronous connection. So a lot of thought goes into, right, how do we imagine lots of different types of people? It's very user-centered, and it always has been. How do you imagine them going about the process of learning? What are the things that we can do to get them to engage in learning, to be a designer, whilst we are not there? That's quite a cool challenge, actually.
So do you have discussion fora like this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a range of sort of synchronous, asynchronous methods. We don't tend to have a lot of synchronous stuff on the design side of things. We rely a lot on what we'd call semi-synchronous student-to-student contact, working in virtual studios. Again, for me, Nicole was trying to describe it earlier, that kind of notion of doing the small activity. You post the activity, and then suddenly, because you're seeing, in our case, you're seeing, 500 other versions of that same activity, automatically, your mind is totally blown by the range of different creative approaches to a single problem. And that in itself is a massive sort of learning mechanism we've found. Levin Wenger call it legitimate peripheral learning. That's the technical scholarly term. In studio, we call it listening in. Students learn so much more from listening in than actually actively contributing. In fact, all our data, and we've got quite a lot of big data on this now, shows that that's the single biggest predictor of student success, is just listening and looking at and interacting with other students. It's not necessarily doing stuff. It's just, being in social media, which is a bit counter to what you might think. So yeah, it's quite cool.
Okay, looks like your 2 minutes and 33 seconds are up. And everyone's back.
And I hope we've got some, it looks like we've got some more points there. That's cool. Okay, so I think what we were going to go on to next, I don't know if there's any point in continuing with this. I'll tell you what, we'll maybe do it quickly. So bear with me 1 second. So I'm just going to share the screen on this one. So this was the next thing that we were going to talk about. I know that this is one of the things that we didn't want to necessarily prioritise, but I wonder whether it might be useful to just touch on it quickly, because I know that we've got Peter here as well. And again, so one of the things that you're going to be confronted with is, how do I do my lectures online, or how do I do this, basically what we would call assimilative sort of content online. And I think I would pick up, first of all, on Peter's point that he made just before the break. This is a chance for you to maybe do things slightly differently. So, again, we'll maybe do some posts in the coming weeks on how to do podcasting, how to do screencasting, video lecturing, and all of that kind of stuff. But again, maybe it's worth asking yourself, if I'm standing in front of like 30 or 50 students delivering the same content, does it really matter that I'm actually there? Is there other ways that you could actually deliver this type of content? And I know that in design, we already probably take a much more, what shall we say, constructivist approach, a much more emergent intuition or tutorial-based approach. So rather than being the single point of authority, we'll try to engage a bit more. But still having that point of contact or that artifact, that piece of, like, here's a video lecture or here's a thing, it can still be quite useful as a starting point for students to say, here's a piece of content. Over the next week, we're going to listen to the piece of content, maybe do some research on it, maybe do some active learning design on it, and then there's going to be a small hand-in that's maybe mixed media towards the end of the week. You can still do interesting sort of lecture-based or content-based things. And one of the things I'd like to draw your attention to was this article on podcasting that Peter Lloyd very kindly did for us, because this is actually quite an interesting thing that you've been doing at Delft, Peter. I'm going to stop the video there.
That's right. We took a course that we taught as a lecture-based course, and we turned it into one that used podcasts to try and get across the same material. So we kind of took a blended approach to the course. So, and it was quite an interesting experiment. And I think the thing was that the students really liked it. And I think one of the reasons was that they could listen to the content anytime that they wanted to. So a lot of them said, I listened to the podcast when I was cycling in. I was had some spare time in the evening, and I kind of listened to this thing. So as a kind of format, it seemed to kind of work pretty well. And I think I'm quite a fan of podcasts in general, just because I think they're a good way of kind of engaging people in a conversation. I mean, often they're kind of conversation, discussion based, and I think they help that constructive experience for the student, that you have to kind of work out where you position yourself in relation to the people that are having a kind of discussion. So I think there are two things. There's using existing podcasts. There are lots and lots of podcasts out there that have design-based themes or business-based themes or science-based themes, things that you can kind of draw on and use as kind of pre-existing material. And they're usually in a kind of series, so you can quite often pull out particular podcasts. There's a really good one called 99% Invisible. It's a really popular one. If you look at the range of subjects that are covered there, there's all disciplines of design: computer science, interior design, architecture, urban planning, product design, fashion, a whole range of subjects that kind of pre-existing material that you can draw on and kind of put into what I kind of call a kind of learning journey. We went through the process of making our own podcasts, and so we had to kind of think out a kind of format for engaging students. So what we came up with was having a kind of an expert interview, and the course was design theory and methodology. So it was a kind of more theory-based course. If you actually put design theory and methodology into Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it should bring up our podcast stream, so you should be able to access those podcasts. I'll put a link on the chat afterwards. So there's a whole kind of a course based around the podcasts. So we had an expert interview, and then we would have a discussion between ourselves as course coordinators, just to kind of reinforce the concepts that came out of the expert interview. And then we used coaching sessions, which were face-to-face coaching sessions, to kind of reinforce that material. And obviously we can't do that anymore, and you have to kind of look for other ways of kind of engaging the material. But our intention was to have a kind of starting point for a discussion about something, and trying to inspire the students to go kind of a bit further and explore specific topics. And we use the kind of show notes that come along with a podcast to put our references and links for people to kind of follow up with. And I think the premise behind it all was a slightly different cognitive model of learning than a lecture. So a lecture, if you think about the cognitive model of lecturing, it's a sort of kind of memory-based activity. If you actually ask people what they actually learn or even remember about a lecture, quite often it's pretty limited. And I think the cognitive model behind the podcast is that it's a much more discursive, conversational format, where you actually have to kind of position yourself in the conversation. So, I feel that's a really good way of engaging with contemporary issues around designing. You can interview students in podcasts. You can interview each other in podcasts. You can interview experts in podcasts. So there's a whole range of formats that you can begin to use. And actually, the delivery mechanism, you can put them on Apple, you can put them on Spotify. They're really accessible. What we found is that they kind of traveled quite a long way. So people kind of recommend a podcast to someone else, and it's gone sort of like 3 steps away, and then I get an email saying, "Oh, we listened to this podcast," from people that we never actually intended to listen to them, but they kind of work really well, and so they're a good archive of material too that you can draw on. So I would really recommend sort of thinking about that as a way of delivering content rather than a kind of lecture or a kind of monologue over a PowerPoint presentation. You can easily record a conversation that you can have online with someone else too. A lot of podcasts are based around that idea. So they're not necessarily, you don't need any kind of face-to-face contact. And I think you can sort of generate interesting material and actually kind of engage on a kind of week-to-week level with what's going on around you, either in the course itself with what the students are doing or what's happening in the world. Obviously there's big things happening in the world. So if you can link your learning to those kinds of things, I think they really work well. So yeah. Okay. We found them to be kind of successful. So I would encourage other people to kind of explore that format.
Definitely. Well, the other one and the point that you mentioned as well is why repeat content that's already available? Yeah. Why not do something different with that? So to touch on that point, Hillary's asking about copyright. Could I ask, what's do Delft make them open?
We made them open. I mean, when we interviewed people, we made it clear that they were going to be publicly available. I tended to use people that were around or visiting, so we didn't pay anyone to kind of do interviews. It was just kind of drawing on people's expertise and trying to kind of show off that expertise somehow. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of published in an open access way for other people to use. So yeah, feel free to draw on them if you want. And I think that's partly why I like the podcasting format. It's a very open format. Generally, you don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to kind of stick to a certain time limit, or they don't have to fit a certain kind of schedule. So yeah, it's a format that kind of works, I think, for education.
And certainly, I know that in our institution, Hillary, I don't know what it's like at Strathclyde, but if we find any content online, as long as we are not hosting it directly on our servers, as long as we're pointing to that content, we're absolutely fine. Or, the copyright of that domain. So I've just put the link to 99percentinvisible.org there in the text. So I'm pretty sure that they're all freely available, aren't they, Peter?
Yes. Yeah.
They are. Yeah, they are. Yeah. And there are some really good podcasts there. Can I ask, Peter, do you do anything do you have follow-up activities with the podcast? Do you do, or is it mainly academic?
Yeah, I mean, it was linked into our assessment, so students had to kind of listen to them, and we discussed them in the classroom. I think this year it was a bit of an experiment, so we actually didn't draw on them as much as we could. And I think that's always that's always the difficult thing is linking the content to a kind of form of assessment and engagement that's kind of meaningful for students. And I think sometimes there's an element that you can be a bit shallow. If you listen to some podcasts, they can be a bit. If you're really trying to teach a theoretical or serious subject, then it's not really something you can do in 30 minutes of a discussion. All you can do, I think, is try and kind of be passionate about something that then the people that listen to them off their own back go away and explore that in more detail. So I very much see them as kind of starting points for kind of self-actualized learning. But I think that was what obviously students are driven by assessment rather than actual, kind of inspiration and interest a lot of the time. So yeah, that balance has to be there too.
Okay, cool. Nice one. Does anybody have any other, any thoughts on that, or any other sort of alternative sort of assimilative modes. Sorry, I'm using the posh formal term there. Sorry. Okay. As I say, the other point I would maybe add to that, well, not add to, reinforce the one that I made at the start, is the notion that it can be hard to bring your group together if you're at a distance. If you say, here's a podcast, you're giving people a thing. I know it sounds odd because you're not giving them a physical object, but you're still giving them a thing around which a group is clustering. A group is doing what you hope, maybe the same activity, thinking the same things. And the responses that come from that, that thing in keeping the group together is quite important, I think.
There is, I think someone was talking, I think Leslie was talking earlier about, forming a community.
Yep.
And I think that's what you can do with a kind of a regular kind of broadcast, a weekly broadcast. You begin to kind of build an audience and build a kind of, a kind of presence that kind of responds. So you can incorporate that in your kind of in your podcast too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. The other thing, I'm very conscious of the fact that we haven't started quite yet. Because again, it is difficult to maybe do in a subject like design where we are spread across many, many different sub-disciplines and subdomains. We haven't set up any what we call OER resources, open educational resources, or places where we can share content, existing content that's really good, whether it's on the history of architecture or the I don't know, the many facets of the technical specification of washers. I don't know. Again, it's a bit harder for us. Again, at the Open University, we use content to prompt students to do design and design thinking. We're a very generic design thinking course or set of courses at the Open University. So we tend to use content for very particular reasons. And it usually tends to be to prompt students to do something, or it's theoretical content that has a very practical outcome that we can then either assess or get them to sort of work on so that we can assess from that. So I don't know, would it be useful to maybe start an OER resource, an open educational resource on found content, or less useful than other things? Again, we are kind of limited in how much time we can spend on this, or does anybody already run a repository of this sort of stuff that they wanted to share with the group? Or here we go. Excellent. So that's
few links coming up.
Nice one. Brilliant. Okay.
Could I say something? I'm Sander from colleague Prof. Peters. In touch with actually both students, but also with a design office. So I run in both worlds. I have a fit in two worlds. And what I noticed on community building is that people start to play silly games at the moment, which are actually really bonding. So, for instance, in the design office, they started to play ping pong remotely. Mm-hmm. and it really brings people together. I see the same thing going on with students. They start to fax each other almost in order to, make jokes about the past and see how contemporary technology is burning down at the moment because, the East Coast is waking up at the moment.
Yep, I would totally endorse that one, Sander, as well. At the very start of our Stage 1 module, students are encouraged to engage in very, very short, playful activities. And again, who else was it? Now, was it Coventry University? They run a series of early sort of cross-cultural studios where they have a meal together. That's the brief, that you've got to have a sort of cross meal, and you sit down at the same time, you have this discussion, and the idea is to try and get as much cross-talk going as possible. There's lots of human playful activities. It'd be quite nice to have some recipes on that, Sander, if you want.
I asked my 350 students, so we created a database that they filled in, I think, 20 minutes. So it was really on the fly with my students' assistants.
Cool, excellent. Send us a link and we'll share it with everybody, okay?
I'll digest it because I promised that it's anonymized, okay?
Okay, no, that's cool. Yeah, no problem at all. If you want to get in touch with me sort of privately and we can look at how we can do that, that'll be sweet. Nice. Okay, sorry, Ross. Share some of the playful activities. So the one that, well, I don't know. Does anybody have a favourite? Peter, Nicole, Georgie? I know my favourite.
Lots of
okay, so my favourite is make a banana out of masking tape. We get students get this welcome pack, and in the welcome pack is a roll of masking tape. And one of the activities they have to do is make a banana out of masking tape. And again, we're lucky. We've got hundreds of students in our module, and the divergence of response from people trying their best to how do you get a structure out of masking tape to just taking a banana and covering it in masking tape, right through to some really incredible sort of structural responses to how they actually do this. And again, all we're intending is a really quick 5-minute activity, but students, they apply their own rules to it. They apply their own conditions. They start to set up social conditions round about it. It gets way more complex just because you're saying, here's some stuff, go and play with it. It's quite cool. That's my favourite one. Nick, do you have a favourite one? Or you?
I'm just recently thinking about the Lego Me limb. I really like that one. So I think we could really make more use of it, so that you basically ask to model yourself in Lego, or not necessarily yourself, an aspect of yourself, or the work you do, or anything around you, and then share that with everyone. It's really quite nice.
Nice. That kind of touches on another kind of deep concept, particularly when you're online and you're at distance. Just because you're online and at distance, that doesn't mean that you're not present. And the notion in distance learning, this notion of presence, is a bit of a theoretical concept, but you'll get what I mean when I introduce the kind of design version of it. We all express our design personalities in lots of different ways, whether it's the way that we might sketch something or the way that we maybe talk about a subject. All of those little cues, these are aspects of your students' design personalities, the way that they'll respond to an activity, how they'll present something, and that will continue with them more and more as we move to online portfolios, to online spaces, even working 24/7, or formally, it's probably going to come back in again, working in architecture studios around the globe in digital environments. The more it's quite important to understand how different design personalities almost kind of like work together. And again, we just don't know. We haven't really had to kind of explore it in much depth. So I think exploring that kind of side of things is quite important. I'm wondering, does that take us nicely into like studio and portfolio? Would it be worth having a look at that sort of stuff? Or is there anything else anybody wanted to touch on while we're here? Okay, so one of the things that we had, it's quite a big thing, this one. I'll maybe jump past tuition and studio because we have touched on synchronous tuition, and there's a lot more we could say about this. As I say, I've got another big blog post coming on virtual studio and how you can actually engage in different practices. What we'll try to do is actually share as many different models of virtual studio that we know of. So again, anybody that's got a model of virtual studio, and by virtual studio, what I should really say is alternative studio here, because you can have a blended studio that's half physical, that's maybe connected in 2 different places round about the globe. It can be entirely virtual. There's lots of different types of studio. So I'll try to bring as many different models together so we can share those with the community. Again, if people think that's of use. But the other thing that might be quite nice to touch on would be assessment. And again, I'm not too sure whether we touch on this in conjunction with portfolio and presentation, because the two things, they very often can go hand in hand in design, the kind of final hand in. Again, typically being the OU, we have a slightly different approach to it. We assess process, not the actual final product, for a lot of our stuff, but not everything. So I'm wondering whether we maybe touch on both of these things. This cartoon actually that I highlighted, if you're in the presentation, feel free to make it bigger or copy it or do other things with it. I know that a lot of universities are struggling with this notion of, but how do we know the students aren't cheating? And again, even I think this was a question that was raised at the Design Society as well, Hilary, I'm not too sure. Again, that would maybe fall back in the old adage that when you're in education, we call it plagiarism. When you go into professional practice, it's called group work. there's a massive difference between how we deal with plagiarism in design and how other sort of educational domains deal with plagiarism. So maybe that's maybe something to wrap into the conversation too. So I don't know. Does anybody want to kick off with that? No? Okay, well, I'll maybe introduce what we do at the Open University. Again, what we try to... Sorry, Leslie, were you... No, oh, sorry. My apologies. So assessment for us is tricky because we're at a distance. What we generally try to do is have very, very, very well-defined sort of like structures and forms of assessment. So we tend to be largely project-based, and they can be quite small projects, or maybe research-based that builds up to an essay, or some well and clearly defined output. I'm guessing just as much as any of you would, if you're running a project-based or a problem-based form of assessment. And basically we build up to that form of assessment by having, say, smaller activities that students can articulate, reflect on. And again, the key to it is getting stuff out of here at every stage so that students can actually, 1, express it consciously, 2, reflect on it, as Leslie Ann and as Peter has mentioned already, and Nicole as well, just how important that reflection loop is. And then 3, to assess that thing that has come out of their head. So we put a lot of effort and time into thinking, how is it that we can, without interrupting the design process, get students to actually articulate, make visible what it is that they're thinking, what it is they're doing at certain stages in the design process. Now that can be quite tricky because one of the downsides is that you tend to break up the design process, and getting students to break out of the, but I'm in the ideation stage and past research, I can't go back to that and forward. That can be quite tricky. But basically, at its heart, that's what we try to do. It's almost about articulating and making visible the stuff that's in your thinking, that's tacit, if you like, in your design practice. So we rely a lot on software and methods that actually get students to share, if you like, their the looser moments, if you like, the less formal moments. And to be quite honest, we have this aphorism or this notion that if you have a really good design process, then the design outcome will automatically be good. And it usually holds to be true. It's very rare that we'll come across a student that is completely unable to articulate how it is that they go about designing. And that's the complete opposite to a lot of traditional design schools. We go into a lot of traditional design schools doing accreditation and stuff, and still speaking to some design students how unable they are to articulate how it is that they come up with design ideas. It is still quite interesting to see that still holds true in a lot of design schools. So I would personally advocate, just as Peter did with the opportunity for lecture, you've got this opportunity to flip how it is that you think students communicate how they've learned designing, okay? You've got this opportunity to maybe even poke it or kick the tires, if you like, of that practice. I don't know. Does anybody else have any other sort of different approaches that they have to assessment, to the general principle of what it is that designers do and then saying that that's been good or bad? Cool. Okay. Well, maybe running out of steam. I mean, it has been an hour and a half. We're doing.
I know there's one question in the Google Doc. Yeah. So the Google Doc, there was a question: is it still necessary to organize an exhibition for the jury of the final project thesis? Mm-hmm. Maybe someone wants to say something about that. We've just recently only started doing exhibitions. So of how many years of design education? Yeah. So that's a new thing for us, funnily enough. So. Interesting. And we do both face-to-face and a virtual exhibition. So, yeah. Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, I think if you're still wanting to maintain a kind of jury approach, I'd be very much in favour of trying to make that as flat as you possibly can. I mean, there's been a lot of critique of even the word crit recently, and there's massive, massive, massive power imbalances and unfairnesses in the jury system, and even just the pin-up system. So having more voices in your critique and doing it online can actually be a really effective way of not having
the physical presence of, a single domineering voice, for example. There are ways that you can actually really flatten. He said, having spoken probably solidly now for about 10 or 15 minutes, somebody else needs to speak. So again, maybe think about it as a way of saying, well, how else am I going to actually say that, some learning has taken place in design here? The other one I would maybe mention, sorry, Leslie, go on. Yes, please.
Well, so I'm just going to give a quick tip that I learned from another colleague of mine who co-taught with me via Zoom. And he was pointing out the way, something that you just did, which we all do in design classes. And we say, okay, so what do people think? And we wait for a response. And so when I started teaching with this colleague, he said, actually, when you're teaching in Zoom, he says that way of asking for feedback is a little bit more chaotic, and then we have to kind of. Yep. He taught me to go very specifically. So, like James's photograph is below mine, so I would go specifically. Yep. James Brown from Umeå, what do you think? Rather than just throwing it out. So, since we all now have to go to Zoom, maybe that's useful feedback for people. And now I'll hand over to James.
Thank you. I wanted to say something about the role of the exhibition. So very briefly, we're in northern Sweden. Our architecture school is 10 years old. It is modeled very closely on the British and the RIBA sort of validated model of teaching, where design studio is really paramount. And it sort of absorbs all of our energy and all of our resources. And now we can't do it. So the kind of big challenge for a lot of my collaborators and my colleagues and my team members is working out, it's a bigger philosophical question about how we teach now. And I think that's a good thing. With the exhibition, we had just a few weeks ago found a way to make the summer exhibition a requirement, because we struggled with many really good students who just left after the submission. They left and they didn't take part, and that was damaging to the community. So we've just made a big effort to make it part of the final examination, and now our university is closed and we can't do that anymore. So it's prompting me to try and explain to my colleagues who maybe don't get this all the time that, as others have just said, design juries are really problematic, and they tend to preserve prejudices which are not constructive, which are not helpful. So what I'm going to try and argue for is that the student submits maybe a PDF that is equivalent to the printed thing they would have sent to exam, and that maybe we then, those are examined. We don't have to give a numerical grade in Sweden. It's a simple pass or fail for everything at every level, which is one of the most liberating things about leaving the United Kingdom. And then those PDFs are something that we could then perhaps exhibit. But I do really struggle to persuade some of my colleagues that the assessment and the exhibition are two different things. I don't think we should automatically exhibit the work a student submits to assessment. Those are two different things, in my opinion.
That's interesting. Yep, that's a really interesting perspective, Henrik. I think I was being polite about the jury system there in that sense too. Has anybody used online either jury for assessment or for final exhibition? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll maybe post some tools that you can use for that. I know that a lot of actual architecture schools over here, James, they do, like the AA, for example, they always have an annual exhibition online as well as offline. Again, it's a different circumstance. I think your point there, though, about what is submitted for assessment and then what gets presented are two very different things. I'm also very conscious of the fact that different sub-disciplines in design, I'll be really keen for other experiences, because I'm an architect. I come from an architectural tradition, very much a studio-based tradition, as James mentioned. Other disciplines have very different practices. Some disciplines, you're already developing your digital portfolio from day one, wherever that might be. So, for example, in 3D visualization, for example, that's where your professional life is going to be. So why not move to there sooner rather than later and actually start to develop that. But I think that point about the difference between the exhibition and the assessment submission, that's an interesting one. Are there different practices in different subdomains? Does anybody want to talk to their specific subject, whether in graphic design or any other design domain, that any particular challenges that anybody is having with assessment or with sort of public presentation?
Well, in my case, I'm from Thailand. I'm a product designer. And our final exhibition just got cancelled because of coronavirus. And there's a question of how do we assess the prototype? Because there's one of the criteria that the prototype must be the evidence to prove that their design hypothesis is possible. It's possible to be manufactured neatly and sellable and usable, something like that. So without the exhibition, there seems to be we're kind of blank on what to do next, actually. That's why I put the question in the Google Doc, and that's why I'm sitting up here, even if midnight in Thailand right now. I'm so worrying about this because it's final exhibition for the last year students, so it's quite important.
That's interesting. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to touch on the practicality of it, but just as a side issue, this is a really important issue, and there's a lot of people talking on social media about this just now. If an institution is maintaining a learning outcome as a necessary prerequisite for assessment, i.e. something that a student has to do, even though the student can't do it, that's not really very fair, is it? So I think some curricula are going to have a decision or make a decision about what it is the learning outcomes need to actually change in order to meet that. So that'll be a first point. A second one, certainly off the top of my head, we do encourage our students to do a lot of sort of prototyping themselves and to do a lot of demonstration of the prototyping. Basically, so we are getting evidence that they are making a prototype and then learning something from the prototype, whether it's a bit of a video, whether it's a series of images to show how the prototype is actually in use. Again, that's not going to be possible for all of your product design. Getting the thing actually manufactured might actually be one of the hardest things. But even that process of learning that the prototype is actually a thing of knowledge, I think would be a really useful learning outcome. And if you can find ways of getting students to make that visible to you, whether it's through images, video, or even through description, like a poetic essay on the feeling of the object that they have just created, I don't know. Some way to make that visible to you might be one way of doing it. I'm very conscious that that's pushing the responsibility back to the student. I think we both have responsibility, both faculty, teachers, and students in this area, to say, how are we going to demonstrate learning, and how are we going to say that's how you have satisfied the learning for me as well? I think both of those things have to be in play, to be honest. Anybody else want to add a suggestion of how?
I can maybe add something. My background is architecture, and I've taught in architectural studios for about 15 to 16 years, and now I'm teaching in product design engineering, and I've been doing that since 2003. So two different areas. The engineers tend to do more group work together to design products, and architects tend to work a little bit more on their own, but design studio is more, there's more of an emphasis within architecture for that. So we have just cancelled our exhibition, and what we have asked the students to do is to concentrate on delivering the product and showing us in any way that they can make what they propose to meet the client's requirements work. So we've asked them to consider things like, if you can't make a prototype, can you do a simulation? Can you do a mathematical simulation with figures or force analysis, etc.? Can you maybe do an FMEA calculation, looking at forces and things like that? Can you maybe even do some simulations of numbers and things through CAD or by hand? And we've also asked if they would consider maybe even modelling real mock-ups out of cardboard and then doing a CAD model that will give us things like shape, form, detail, all of that sort of thing. So we've asked them to think of any way other than a model to see if they can do it. Yep. Now, it could be to prove that a part works, they have to do a CAD model and then an animation to show us, particular parts of gears working and so on. So we've actually put it back to them and said, how would you do it now that you can't necessarily do a prototype? We've not stopped them doing a prototype because no matter what, there will be students who produce a great prototype, even in the conditions we're sitting in now. Yep. So we don't want to, stop that creativity. So we're interested to see the outcomes.
Yeah, I would totally support that last one. Maybe Nicole and George, you might not agree with me on this one. We have one of our project-based assessments in our stage 1 module. Students have to make a prototype, and that's the learning outcome, if you like, that there is something in making a prototype and working with a prototype that is a piece of design knowledge. And I always take, or used to take when I was a tutor, a very, very strict view on this. You can always, always, always prototype something, whether it's scaling something down, whether it's touching the shape of something, whether it's looking at something, whether it's, there's lots of simulations that you can do to ask other questions of something.
That's it. So we're stretching physical prototype to physical and virtual prototype and simulations.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's one thing that we haven't touched on, actually, Hilary. I've got it in the forthcoming post on virtual studios. The fact that we can actually work a lot more in digital spaces. So, for example, whether it's building information modelling and architecture, we can work in these shared digital environments, or product lifecycle manufacturing and product design. There's a whole range of, it's very advanced software. And again, you're tied into proprietary systems usually, such as Autodesk or others. But these are also options that working in these digital spaces. And this is the key thing. We have this massive opportunity for ourselves to start working in these spaces and bring our existing knowledge to those spaces. So what is digital prototyping? I've seen a lot of digital prototypes that have got no conception of what a physical object is, even though they're representing a physical object digitally. And putting your experience into those digital spaces and saying you need to do this to your digital model in order to test Y or whatever it might be, or cut the building like this and do this so you can see what the experience of the space is here. You're bringing that sort of knowledge into that space is really, really, really important. And I'm not too sure we've been particularly good at connecting generations, if you like, of designers from different modes of design. I think CAD was a bad thing. But anyway, that we've moved from...
Yes, that's a different thing. Yes. We are also asking students, and students are doing this off their own back, producing things like AR models, little augmented reality, where they'll use their phones and they'll use apps, and they are quite comfortable with that kind of thing. And that's useful because it's an additional, we can see, we can look at it, we can move it around and things like that. So again, students are probably a great resource for us in finding out what are the best ways to do things.
Definitely. Brilliant. Okay. Yep. Nicole's just saying that she needs to leave. Yes, absolutely. I've been taking a copy and paste of the chat about every 5 minutes because I'm very conscious of the fact there is nothing worse that if you get kicked out of Zoom, you don't get a copy of the. Well, we'll do something with the chat anyway. It's going to be okay. Nick, thank you very much for everything. I'll catch you later. I've got no problem with sharing the chat publicly, but I'm very conscious of the fact that there's a lot of people to ask permission of to do that. So I'm not too sure what we do with the chat. It's really valuable stuff, and the recording will be available, and people will be able to see the chat in the recording. But I'll maybe go through it and maybe pull out some of the more sort of pertinent questions after this session. Okay.
It would be great to get the links.
Yes, absolutely. I'll definitely scrape the links as well. There's a few others that follow from those links as well. So I think I'm very conscious of the fact that we're starting to flag a bit. I've broken one of the rules that we already suggested was a good idea. I stick to, what was it, 5 minutes of content.
15 minutes at a time.
There's Georgie with a slightly breaking voice and high pitched. Okay, so I think maybe I'll just start to wrap it up then. Instead of introducing a new theme, I'm really keen that we continue this in some way, or that we do something with this that's useful to people, okay? Because as I say, we're doing this pivot in a really, really short space of time. As I say, at the Open University, we've been doing this for 50 years, and it's kind of perverse that people are being asked to do this overnight. So, and again, it's not necessarily the case as well that our model is going to be useful, because 9 times out of 10 it's not going to be. To convert to that level of distance-ness or onlineness is quite a big thing to do. So again, I think we're going to be putting a lot of like sticky tape over the pipes and making things work over the next few weeks. So does anybody have any notion of, or does anyone want to suggest? In fact, I'll do Leslie Ann's trick. I'll move to my left, your right, and I'll maybe start with Leslie Ann. If anybody wants to suggest any ways that we could support, what's the best way that we could support over the next few weeks, rather than duplicating stuff? Do you think that recipes might work, or maybe having regular meetups like this? Is that a more effective way of doing it? Maybe dividing up these meetups into specific topic areas, focusing a bit more on particular things. Just any ideas that anybody might have. Leslie?
So I think regular meetups would be great. As long as I'm available, I would join. I also think that I would love to read what other people's tips were. So if you could also, the same way I was a guest blogger, I would love if some people within this group could blog about, just their experience.
Cheers, and thank you for the lead in there, Leslie. And seriously, if anybody has a recipe that they would like to share, or any content they would like to share, then please let me know. I'll add you as an editor or contributor to the blog. Or if you want to just send it in a document format, I'll do the editing myself. The regular meetup thing, does anybody have a notion of how often they might like to do that, or whether that might be useful? I've done it, haven't I?
And I know someone else is also going to talk. I'm in a few meetups that actually meet like weekly and every fortnight, because everyone's at home right now, and people just join if they have time. And then I'm in another meetup group that meets once a month. So I'm just kind of sharing that periodicity.
Okay, cool. The other thing I'm very keen to do, if we do go ahead with this, is maybe to distribute it a bit more, and maybe that we do sort of 3 time zone type meetups, something like that. Maybe that hits the kind of 3 major, because I'm very conscious of the fact that there's a lot of New Zealand and Australian colleagues who really wanted to be part of this. It's a little bit late for some of them, so that might be another idea. Sorry, did somebody else want to add something there?
Here maybe from Delft. Yeah, actually I'm in Utrecht. What you see now is that the internet is basically burning down. So when people are waking up, we have to move away from them anyway. So be ahead of them. That might be a pointer.
No, I do agree, Sander. Yeah, absolutely. I think the more we can try to keep things going in as lo-fi a way as possible, it is no bad thing as well. Yep. Cool.
I know that McKinsey is pushing things, let's say, to the next working zone. So, but we should push it the other way around, I suppose.
Right. Well, again, if we distribute it a bit more, that might be a bit more resilient. But yeah, okay. Cool. Are there any topics or subjects that we... Oh, sorry, Peter, yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, I think it's great. I mean, we've had 55 people here, all talking about design education. I think you've done a great job. I just wanted to say, yeah, thanks very much. And I'm just thinking about future meetups. Maybe they can be a bit more kind of problem-based. So, the problems that people are coming across on the day-to-day level, and maybe kind of like any kind of best practices or things that have worked. I think it's more a case of the small things that are kind of working rather than, you know, the big discussions about design education. But this has really framed it well, I think. So yeah, well done, Derek. Yeah.
There were 75 people at one point. I was really starting to worry that the whole thing was going to fall apart. And we didn't need plan B. It was great. No, I think that'd be a good one, actually, the problem-based thing, something that might actually get people really prompting or really thinking about how would I actually do that in my domain. That might be quite nice. I'm very conscious of the fact that we struggled to find the right scale, if you like, of concept, because most of the questions we started with a lot of people was, how do I do this? And you know, it's just one big question. So yeah, breaking it down into chunks. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Any other themes or any other things that people would really welcome us trying to have a go at or doing something with? Oh, sorry, Noor's got a question about prototyping or role-playing for design. Rapid prototyping. Okay, cool. I'll maybe add that question for after the event, Noor, and see if anybody else on Twitter has got an answer to that one. The role-playing one, it did actually occur to me, I think a few people mentioned that they were moving into, or some of their assessment practices now were around about direct user testing and actually interacting, you know, with users and clients. And again, that's something that is going to be slightly challenging to simulate. But again, we've also got the opportunity, connecting as colleagues, of maybe doing different forms of simulation or different sort of connection. I know that Leslie and I have talked about maybe teaching across curricula or between institutions. And also in that activity I had for the sort of use the crisis as your curriculum, the notion of maybe connecting with a different colleague from a different place to act as your design client, or to maybe, I don't know, break up the process, or to do something different, or to maybe do some kind of user testing in some other kind of way. Maybe think about those kinds of opportunities as well. And again, if people are willing to engage or volunteer to help with those kinds of things, then that might be quite cool as well. Right, okay. I think, unless there's anything else, anybody wanted to...
Thank you so much, by the way. Thank you.
Nope, no problem. Good fun.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I will take a dump of the text and we'll try and do some kind of summary or some kind of response from this at some point tomorrow. And in the meantime, stay safe, everybody. Don't lick your face, or whatever the advice was. I can't remember what it was. And all the best. Thank you all very much. I'm going to stop recording this end. I'm going to stay on for a wee bit if anybody wants to chat, though. So thank you very much. Isabel, how are you doing?
I'm good. I just had to move my chair because you could see my bed behind the camera.
Nope, wasn't looking. Don't worry. I'm just actually having a quick look to see. Holy, what? The recording was 15 gig. Wow, that's big.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Derek. This has been great.
No, cool. I'm glad it was useful. And thank you very much for that, Peter. That was greatly appreciated, that wee bit on podcasting. Nice. I've got a Camtasia. I did a screen grab of this. But yeah, please, if you could share it somehow or do something with it, Henrik. Mine is absolutely massive, so I'm probably going to have to do something